Coming to you from the City of the Weird. Exploring topics from the esoteric and unexplored to dimensions unknown. Shining a light of truth on the darkest corners of our reality. Welcome to the Curious Realm. Well, hello everybody, and welcome to this episode of The Curious Realm. We are live here, coming to you from Austin, Texas, the City of the Weird. We have a great lineup tonight. In the second part, we have good friend of the show, Stephen Myers of the Pharaoh's Pump Foundation, on to discuss the Great Pyramids of Giza, their construction, his amazing hypothesis for the construction using water locks, all kinds of things. He has some amazing videos, folks. Make sure to stop on by. Follow him at pharaohspumpfoundation.org. Give what you can. His work is absolutely awesome. Hands down, some of the coolest stuff I've seen in years and years when it comes to how the pyramids were constructed. You know, I mean, I'm not saying that there wasn't inspiration from somewhere else, all kinds of things, even amazing alignments with it. But humanity is an ingenious species. And that is some of what we will be getting into tonight with our first guest, Jason Quitt. He is the author of Postures of Power, as well as Astral Genesis, his new book. This is the book that I met him over at Stairway to the Stars in Vegas recently, and his revelations regarding sacred geometry, angles, alignments with things both on Earth as well as in the sky, from ancient civilizations to now, from secret societies to secret priesthoods across the globe, is absolutely awesome. His work is amazing. His website, folks, just so you know, is thecrystalsun.com. His book is Astral Genesis. Welcome to the show, Jason Quitt. How are you, my friend?
I'm doing good. Glad to be here.
Absolutely, man. I am so happy to have you here. I've been excited for this episode since you said you would come on shortly after our meeting in Vegas, and I have had some time to go through and read the books. Your work is voluminous and amazing, man. The ties that you have made throughout ancient civilizations with their use of sacred geometry, sacred alignments, and initiation rites. Everything else is just mind-boggling. It's so incredible. How did you first come to the world of esoteric research and things like that, Jason?
Well, I had some humble beginnings, which started out with my own personal awakening experiences, and we discussed this a little in Vegas. Basically, I started to have out-of-body experiences. My whole world, my whole perception of the world just kind of changed overnight, and I started to become a seeker. And I had to figure out this new world that opened up to me. I started to have contact experiences. I started to be guided into different things. And what really has been in the background of my mind since this has happened, and this has been over 20 years, has been theology and mysticism, ancient civilizations. Because a lot of the things that I've experienced, they had some type of connection to past lives. They had some type of connection to these ancient mystery teachings. So when I started to go into this topic to try to basically explore for myself, to try to figure out what was going on with me, it wasn't, it took a long time for me to be public, to even share my story, and to kind of share the information I was gathering. But I would say that I've been very well guided. And when I find something that I can't find in any other book, then I have to write the book myself.
And once again, your realm of research into this is absolutely amazing. It is a jaw-dropping amount of information that you have put into astrogenesis. I mean, Egyptian postures of power to begin with, and the ideas of yogic practices, things like that, reaching back into ancient Egypt, is one thing, but astrogenesis, going into all of the sacred alignments and how those actively influence the first work, because it was a revelation while you were writing and researching the first book that led you down the adjunct path of the astrogenesis alignments and everything else, correct?
Yeah. See, with the Egyptian postures book, I was very interested in Egyptian mysticism. And the second book that I was writing, which I was still not done, I keep writing other books, but I need to finish that one. But the second level for the Egyptian postures, I was writing it, and I got about halfway through. And what I was doing for my research was I was really getting into the Book of the Dead. I was getting into the pyramid texts, and I was just trying to absorb everything firsthand. I didn't want other people's interpretations. I wanted to go right to the source material and work through it myself. And because I've been working with mystical texts and different theologies from around the world for almost 20 years, I started to read these texts with very specific perspective of what I should be looking for. But I was actually quite surprised, because as I was going through the pyramid texts, for example, I started to see a very obvious correlation to the gods and the stars. And the journey into the underworld, the journey of the afterlife, and to be reborn again. And just that story alone, that motif is absolutely fascinating. But the language, I mean, if you go read the pyramid texts, one sentence could hold so many different motifs, theology. Yeah. I mean, it's a heavy reading. And if you don't understand the words, or you don't understand what they're referring to, you have to have this built up background of understanding just to get through that text. It's very heavy. So as I was going through it, I started to realize that the journey through the underworld, the journey to be reborn, actually followed a very specific pattern of a solar motif. And it had to do with the dying of the sun, going into the underworld, which is the night, and passing through different star systems. And the different star systems and different stars are the gods. So it makes it very clear in the pyramid text that, you know, when they speak of specific stars or specific constellations, they're actually referring to gods. And they refer to them both as gods and stars. So when I took the piece and I started to follow the direction of the path of dying, or the path through the underworld, what happened is that I discovered that it was an allegory for the death of the sun and the resurrection of the sun. And it's part of this grand solar motif that we see in many other ancient cultures. So once I realized this, it made for a really good chapter. I called this chapter The Brazen Serpent, and I went through a lot of mystical understandings, theological understandings, and relating it to astrology and basically the seasons of the earth. But what happened with astral genesis is that as I was going through this process, I was doing a lot of work looking at the pictures of the tombs, because like the Valley of the Kings, the Valley of the Queens, those tombs are almost ground to ceiling, covered in the most amazing artwork.
Yeah.
Retelling the story of the Book of the Dead, the pyramid text, all of that. And there was a couple tombs that were very interesting to me. And I found some symbols, some beautiful motifs on these walls. And because you can't just take a picture and put it in a book, you know, you can't do that.
Yeah.
I'm an artist. I got into, or I went to school as a graphic designer. So what I do is I take examples of the artwork, and then I take it into Illustrator, and I do like a trace. So I can get it as a line art vector file. Because that's what you need when you're doing books and graphics and things. So as I was doing this and started to do a couple of these symbols, I realized that even though the symbols were different, they all followed a very specific pattern. And there's an old axiom that has been in the back of my mind for many years. And I believe it does come from Egypt. And the axiom is, if you want to know the secret of something, measure it. You know?
Yeah.
So that's what I did. I threw it on a grid and I started to measure the image. And I was finding that the image was actually based on a grid that had very specific angles to it. So this kept coming up and coming up in all the different symbols I was reworking on the computer. And there was two angles that kept coming up. And the angles were, see, that's a perfect example you just pulled up here too. Because now I have an eye, I can look at these pictures and I can actually see where the hidden angles are. But before that, I had no clue. But basically, there's a very specific angle of 23.5 degrees in the layout. And there's a very specific angle of 15 degrees in the layout. And so when you know what you're looking for and how to grid the picture, you start to realize that these aren't regular artists that are drawing this work. This is done by, call it a scientist priest, someone who knows what they're doing. And basically they're telling us, they're creating a picture or a motif that has an underlying language to it, and it's a language of geometry. And once you can decipher and read the language of geometry in these images, it starts to tell a very interesting story. And so, you know, what is 23.5 degrees? Well, that's the axial tilt of the Earth. The Earth is not straight; it's not vertical. It's tilted at the equator at 23.5 degrees, and what that does is it gives us our seasons. So we have the winter solstice, equinoxes, summer solstice, and this was something that they said, or mainstream history teaches us, that this was discovered about 2,000 years ago. And it was first documented by Plotny, I believe, in Greece. But it was discovered like 100 years before him. So about 2,000 years, this information. What I was seeing in the evidence was things going back about 4,500 years or more. Wow. Specifically just in Egypt, it was going back 4,500 years. So I knew that if they were encoding the tilt of the Earth in their solar geometry, because it was a solar motif geometry, then the Egyptians knew a lot more about the geography of our planet, the seasons, the tilt, the stars, than we know. Like even this picture that you're showing of, this is from the Book of the Dead, of Weighing of the Heart.
Yep.
You have this strange motif, and it's a symbol. It's a symbol. This is not something that they were trying to depict as the afterlife. This is actually a star map, and it shows you the path of where the soul or the sun goes through the stars. And the scales that we're seeing had a dual role. One played the role of Libra, the only scales of the zodiac, because this is when this is right before the sun dies from Scorpio and it enters into the underworld. And then if you want to get even more into detail of this, this also gets into the Northern Cross, which is also the scales. So we're going back to very ancient asterisms. And the heart and the feather is also Job's coffin and Delphinus, you know, or sorry, Delphinus and Lyra. So, you know, if we take these images and we put them right onto a star map, they are almost identical matches. And then when you go to the Egyptian Book of the Dead, it talks about that journey with the stars in association with the journey. So this is a very, like, I would say a unique perspective.
Absolutely.
Of this information. But what's beautiful about this information is that because they encoded the geometry into it, because it was so specific the way they laid it out, that the geometry itself confirms the story. Yeah. And the other thing, the other angle that was very specific in these images was 15 degrees. And these are all, and 15 degrees is a very important degree or angle in the sky. And this is the way that the ancients would divide the heavens, which would be 15 and 30 degrees. Constellation is 30 degrees.
Yep.
1 hour of time, so the sun passes through the sky at 15 degrees per hour. So these are very specific solar angles, and they were placed in certain tools and certain images to describe not only the passing of seasons and what seasons they're in, but also even the hours and how to find those degrees. So very, very specific information, but it's not something that you can find unless you're taught the language.
Well, and you know, once you start getting into mystery schools, things like that, once again looking into things like the Knights Templar, they were huge users of the same degrees that you're talking about, and they much like the Egyptian high priest, they had no need to write it in a crazy secret code. I mean, I guess they did write it in a crazy secret code. They wrote it in hieroglyphs, which was not it wasn't Coptic, you know, it wasn't like the language of the common people. Everybody walking the streets of Egypt did not know how to read hieroglyphs. You know, that was a very sacred thing and something held for folks of high regard in society, things like that. Even the fact of the images from the Book of the Dead being on a tomb wall. These were important things if you were to enter the afterlife. If you didn't have this spell for your spirit to see upon waking, you were in some sincere trouble, as far as Egyptian religion went.
Oh, absolutely. And it was so important, in fact, that the sarcophaguses were painted on the inside.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just one sarcophagus, it was sarcophagi.
That's right. And painted with star maps.
Yes.
On the inside, that match up with these same stories that you're talking about, the transition of the sun because that is what was held sacred above all else at that point in Egyptian hierarchy, was the passing of the sun, the story of the sun dying, coming back to life, and its circuit through the constellations of the night. Because yes, they understood that there were constellations that, you know, existed elsewhere. Everything else, it was pretty remarkable. Now, and go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, and the way that worked was through observation.
Yeah.
So they mapped the course of the sun over the solar cycle of the year, and they noticed that when the sun is, let's say, in the winter months, you have Orion as like the main constellation in the sky.
Yep.
And so when it's the winter months or the wet months, and the sun is in a very specific position and the stars are rising from a very specific position, they would create stories about, let's say, Osiris, which was the god of Orion. They would create stories of Orion and what he's doing on Earth during that time when that sun is in the position of Orion. So as the sun makes its transit through the 12 constellations or through the 12 gods, the stories, the attributes, and what's happening on Earth changes in accordance with what you see in heaven.
Yeah.
So it was this very ancient philosophy of the influences of as above, so below in the sky. And life changed. So you had to change your life during certain seasons.
Yep.
You had to plant, you had to harvest, you had to store food. There were certain plants that would come at different times of the year.
Yep.
So they had to create stories and know when you see those stars in the sky, this is the time you do this.
Well, and it's because the story is much easier for the common person doing the planting to understand and remember than the actual science of, hey, man, when this thing rises 15 degrees above the horizon, we need to put seed in the ground. The common person, even right now, the common person does not know ascension declension when it comes to setting up a telescope. If you give them a telescope and just give them, here's your right ascension and your declension, have fun, regular person. Not everybody knows how to use a telescope in that way. Not everybody knows how to set a north azimuth on something and equatorially align a telescope so that it tracks things in the sky. But everybody can understand that moss grows on a certain side of a tree.
Yes. And also, they didn't have the technology we had.
Yeah.
But they did have technology.
Oh, absolutely. Huge technology.
And even if it's a stick in the ground to see the shadow, you
It's
know, most people can't read a shadow with a stick today.
and what's amazing, Jason, to me, and this is where I say, like, was there possible inspiration from elsewhere? Absolutely. I have no issue with that. I have no issue with shafts in the Great Pyramid pointing towards star systems. Okay. What I have an issue with the Great Pyramid is, I'll be darned if you'll ever get me to call that thing a tomb. Because whoever they will put in that king's chamber, they intended him to go nowhere. There are zero markings in that thing. There's no inscriptions from the Book of the Dead. There's no spells to tell Set to weigh your heart. Nothing like that whatsoever. So it's obvious it had a different use, most definitely, which may have been a high technological use. Who knows? But the wild thing is, they had the knowledge to be able to build it. They had the ingenuity to be able to build it.
Yes, and my question is not how. You know, you start out as, you know, how do they move the blocks, right? It's very difficult. But for me, the question is, there's obviously a very deep knowledge of cycles of time,
Yes,
measurement, scale, location. There's all these things wrapped.
yeah, geolocation.
Yes, even the very specific angle of 51.8 degrees of the slope. There's all these things about this pyramid, and my question is, who is the architect? How did they figure this out? How did they build it? How did they come to an agreement of just how to set this up? How did they lay the plan out on Giza plateau? And there is a secret of the pyramids, that it's an open secret, but people don't really grasp on it as the secret. But for me, it's absolutely substantial. This discovery is that the pyramids on the Giza plateau, the three pyramids plus the Sphinx,
Yep.
is it's a solar calendar.
Sure.
And if you stand in a very specific position, looking at the Sphinx, during the winter solstice, the sun will set behind Menkaure, the small pyramid to the left. During the both equinoxes, the sun will set right on the back of the Sphinx, so the sun will stand on the back of the Sphinx. And during the summer solstice, the sun will set right between the Great Pyramid, Khufu, and the Middle Pyramid. And it will set right between these two mounds, or the two mountains, which is the Akhet symbol, which is the two mounds of creation that the sun sets to go into the underworld. So it tells a very ancient story, and it has a purpose and a function right there.
Yes.
It's so much more, but just that alone is worth scratching your head over.
Well, absolutely, man. And more than anything is the connection that we had to the earth until all of very recently in humanity. I know my grandfather grew up as a sharecropper, things like that. He needed no farmer's almanac to know when to put seed in the ground, or when the catfish were going to be biting, you know, or when to go out and trap what animals. He needed none of that. That was passed down to him, and once again, known by the stars in the sky, known by the constellations rising as to when hunting time would be best, stuff like that.
And this is why the first calendars were actually like lunar calendars.
Lunar and Venusian.
Say that again?
And lunar and Venusian.
Yes.
Using Venus as well.
Yes.
Because those are things that occur in regular cycles that you can track. And Venus is a very long cycle. You know, when you look at the Mayan calendar, I think it's like 10,000 years, something like that. I forget exactly what the number of years per cycle is, but that's basically the one transit of Venus around the solar system.
Yes.
is what that is. So.
And they actually, after a long time, this article just came out this year, I believe, or 2023, where they just finally figured out the different long count calendars from the Aztecs. Because there wasn't just one calendar, they had multiple calendars, and some were very odd counts, and they just figured it out that each individual count had to do with a different planet. So they were actually tracking not only the planets, but the stars, the sun, the moon, obviously. But these are very complicated systems that take a very long time of observation to fully grasp the influence on the planet. And this is also why, yeah, there it is right there.
Yeah.
And this is also why with the ancient religions, remember, we came out of the last ice age and into the Neolithic period. We came into farming communities. That was where we started from, is just agrarian societies, farming and herding animals. And they knew that the tides of the rivers that fed the channels to get to their food, there was more water during a full moon cycle, less during a new moon cycle. Yeah. They knew that they had to harvest at the full moon. They knew to plant the seeds in the new moon. You know, so they had to follow very specifically timing of not only the stars in the sky, but, you know, when the sun hits very specific points on the horizon. So this is why you'll see these stone markers.
Absolutely.
And it's like when that sun hits that stone marker, it's, you know, a couple days of the year, it hits that stone marker. It says, okay, now it's time to put those seeds in the ground. Yeah. So for a lot of people, seeing these kind of, you know, little Stonehenges around all over the world, this was a way of survival, to set up the environment so that you can know exactly the position of the stars and the sun, the path of the moon, and they would actually create these very complicated cycles. They're not perfect. They're not perfect.
No, but they're pretty well dependable. And it's interesting once you start getting into those cycles. Even right now, we're up against a cycle of possible polar flip coming up. Like, and people do not realize that, Jason. The fact that, like, it's kind of the idea of, if you spin a quarter, you know how it eventually spins flat? Imagine there's no table. It would rotate. And that's basically what happens to the Earth's core, is eventually it wobbles so much, it flips over and north becomes south and south becomes north. And we are far overdue for that. Geomagnetically.
It's happened many times.
Yes, and it is recorded in magma cores, all kinds of things. Whenever magma settles and the iron filings in it, the iron pieces are directed toward magnetic north, and we see that flip on a pretty regular schedule.
I hope it does not flip in our lifetime. That's all I gotta say.
I hope so too. But it is the case that, like, magnetic north is drifting almost a mile a day. Yes. It's wild. That wobble that happens is getting wider, and that is a known cycle. It's things that, yes, over long periods of watching and observation, people pass this information down, and we may not consider it as important as they used to back in the day, because we don't live and die by it, Jason. Yes. Ancient civilizations, even our great grandparents, like, lived and died by this information. You know,
they left it in stone.
Yeah,
and it survived at least since Göbekli Tepe, so 11,000 years. The issue is, if this happened to us today, our homes, our buildings, our technology, our books, the things that we record data on of who we are, that stuff is not going to last. So, let's say the survivors 2,000 years from now, when they discover the archaeology of the massive garbage we dump on this planet.
Yeah, yeah. Just the beautiful arrangement of landfills and
Yes.
and where they're located.
Yes, they'll find lots of
You
wind turbine blades. That's what they'll find.
The odd and horrifying thing, though, Jason, is that is an archaeologist's dream. When they come across the spoils of a civilization and like the trash dump outside the wall, that's when they start finding out real stuff. You know, that's when they start finding out things that like they considered trash. You know, that hey, maybe you found inside of a house before or something, but now you realize it doesn't quite have the significance that maybe you thought it did. But the concept of technology and the technological loss of humanity is a constant conversation on this show. Like I've got right now a 1 terabyte thumb drive in my hand. Number one, I remember having an Atari 2600. The fact that I'm holding a terabyte in my hand right now still boggles my mind. If I threw this over my shoulder in my backyard and 100 years from now, 50 years from now, somebody found it with a metal detector, do you think that we would still be using USB drives?
No. And do you think the memory would still be on there? I don't think so.
It might be. Probably not, due to the elements and everything else. It's not like a military grade thumb drive. But at the same token, it's the fact of would they have the technology to read it right now? If you show somebody an 8-track tape, most people would be like, "What the heck's that thing?" I love my 8-track, but not a lot of people know what they are. You know,
if you and like 100 people get stranded on an island today, and you don't have any technology, and someone says to you, "We got to make a cell phone to get out of here.
We got to make a coconut radio," like the professor, you know.
Right. we have to go to the roots of the most ancient technology to survive. And if you're surviving off the most ancient technology, in a couple generations, those children will not know anything of the technology. It would just be like myths and magic of just stories that you tell of crazy technology of the past.
Yeah.
It's like I'm talking to you right now. It's got to be a couple thousand miles from each other, but it's in real time talking to you.
Yep.
You know, tell that to, try to explain that to a tribe that, just gets introduced to modern society.
There are still tribes that are not introduced to modern society, and we fight tooth and nail to keep them that way. Jason, there was the one not too long ago where there was the video of them throwing spears and shooting arrows at like drones that were flying over the rainforest, just doing general mapping and stuff like that. But imagine their reaction to that. Like for us, drone going over, doing a little bit of measurement. Okay. But imagine that to them, somebody who has been without outside contact or technological contact for their entire existence.
So you're saying UFOs are just people that live in mountains that are more advanced than us.
Number one, happy birthday, Thiago Tietchan. He is the sole MUFON investigator for Brazil. One of the countries with the most sightings in the world, and there is an official MUFON investigator. Now, when I interviewed him, one of the questions I asked was, what about reports out away from the cities, like with the native tribes, things like that? He's like, well, number one, we don't get a lot of reports from them, like coming in, because it's like a 1.5-day journey one way on a boat to come in. But whenever I get reports from forestry workers, things like that, people working for the government that are out doing work, and they give me a report and I go out there, I hear stories all the time. And for them, they wouldn't report it because it's nothing strange to them. They still live their life by looking at the night sky every night. they still live their life in that exact way, where it's like it is live and die by sunset and moon glow, you know. And so they are regular observers of the night sky, so they see things regularly. To them, it's nothing strange. They would never come report it because it's not unidentified or weird for them. It's in the realm of the norm.
And this is what I found out from my whole origin story, is that when I was having these out-of-body experiences, I was having contact experiences with beings that people would describe as aliens. And for me, I had the more shamanic point of view, where these were dimensional beings or spiritual beings.
Sure.
That, you know, just live outside of our physical reality. And that's how I always viewed them from the start. And then when I got into the shamanic community and the native community, and we would have open discussions of these things, that's the way that they saw them. And it was nothing out of the ordinary. It's what all their ancestors have talked about since the beginning of time, that these beings exist. And whether they say inside the earth or in another dimension, but it's really just a space that we cannot connect to in the physical reality.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, especially when you're talking indigenous tribes, their use of indigens, herbs, sacred plants, things like that. I am a big believer, Jason, and I know we had this conversation in Vegas privately of these things are slightly adjunct to us vibrationally. We see and hear a very, very tiny slice, like less than 500 nanometers width of the entire electromagnetic spectrum. Very, very tiny slice that is visible light and audible sound. The rest of the world and universe is outside of that. I'll give a prime example right here. This is a couple of pictures that I show regularly whenever I'm interviewed on shows about vibrations, frequencies, things like that. These are a couple of pictures that I took at Pryor's Ledge in Salem, Massachusetts. I'm a huge fan of that town. Love Salem, Massachusetts. Proctor's Ledge, not Pryor's Ledge. Sorry, folks. Proctor's Ledge is where the actual hangings of the witches took place. So if you look on that wall, there's a little plaque there for each individual person that was prosecuted and persecuted during the Salem witch trials. Now, with me this day, I actively had my full spectrum modified camera. This is the exact same model camera that took the previous picture. Exact same. The only difference is the filters have been stripped off of it for astrophotography and full spectrum use. So it's seeing in the near infrared, the near ultraviolet. This is very much the way that a parrot or a tetrachromic person would see this reality, as opposed to how we average see it. So there is an entire world of color that's right there, and an entire world of detail that is slightly different, that is just adjunct and outside of. And what's funny is that when it comes to astrophotography, you start getting all kinds of crazy details when you strip those filters of reality off the camera, you know, and start seeing them for the actual things that are there, and the glowing red hydrogen, everything else. It's pretty remarkable, the detail and additional detail that you get out of images.
And I bought the first digital cameras. You know, that was my generation.
Yeah.
And the first digital cameras, I have pictures on my computer that I can share with you later, full out apparitions that you could fully see, make out the details, and weird things.
Yeah.
I think they fixed that problem.
Yeah,
You don't see that anymore.
and it was filtering. There wasn't the same kind of filtering glass in front of sensors and things like that. and sensors made assumptions for things as well. That now we're using all kinds of AI and real time algorithm to pick up as close to as possible what is there. So, but it's interesting how these ancient societies knew about these vibrations. They knew about these things that were lower, like theta waves, things like that. When you start looking at, or temple complexes elsewhere in the world for initiation rites, Malta comes to mind immediately, where the chambers there resonate in the theta realm, which is connected to like the third eye and lucid dreaming, things like that. These are typical brainwave patterns that I'm almost convinced that the king's chamber itself in the Great Pyramid is a binaural beat chamber used to activate the pyramid. It's two shafts that are slightly offset in length, that has baffles. There's always a breeze going by. So yeah, you could absolutely use that to tune the frequency of the chamber and make the whole place vibrate piezoelectrically.
I think that is one of the secrets of ancient sites, is a way to modify the air like a wind instrument. So you're creating chambers, and when you go to the Grand Gallery and there's certain chambers that just reverberate so incredibly that one voice can be 1,000.
Yes.
And there is a power to that. But when there are people that have measured the standing wave frequencies in these different chambers, and what they found is that they're very low frequency, very much like the earth tones. So like you're saying, like the very low magnetic oscillations of delta waves.
Yeah.
Very low.
8 hertz, things like that.
8 hertz
2,
and
3
below.
hertz. Yeah.
Between, I would say, like 1.4 hertz to about, the theta wave is around 4.
Close to it.
Close to 4. So yeah, it was just below that 8-10 hertz range that you really get to these extremely low frequencies. And those are the frequencies that our brain enters naturally when we're in the very low states of sleep.
Yep.
And this is the whole thing with meditation, is that it's almost the state in between waking and dreaming. So you want to get your beta waves down to alpha waves. And then when you're meditating, you want to get those alpha waves down to theta.
Yep.
And that is when you have these incredible experiences, very similar or not similar at all to taking these shamanic medicines.
Yep.
So you don't need anything. You just need to learn how to meditate and drop those brain frequencies to go into resonance with, I believe it's just another dimensional field that the earth has naturally. And that's where all these crazy things exist.
Absolutely. Absolutely. 100%. And that is a lot of my explanation for not just paranormal events, Jason, but the paranormal events that tend to happen around experiencers. It's almost the idea of they're like a watch or a needle that's been around a magnet and now carries that weak magnetic field always. It's really interesting once you start digging into UFO, UAP experiencers and the other paranormal experiences that they've had. And I am a big believer that these things, whether it's a spiritual awakening that you've had that changes your frequency and the way that you interact with the world around you, whether it's a paranormal event, anything like that, that is the key. That is the key to transitioning to that ancient knowledge that's there. Call it Akashic record, what have you,
And it could be as simple as, your bedroom is actually on top of an underground water current.
Yep.
and it just changes the magnetic fields of the room, and suddenly you're having these intense experiences.
Yeah, absolutely.
Poltergeists, contacts, awakening experiences, and then you go somewhere else and then nothing happens.
Yeah.
And you realize that it could be an environmental issue.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Much like, you know, they came to find out that the Oracle of Delphi, some really intense natural gas in the area. Hang around in a cave with that going on, you may be talking to some gods and having some visions here and there, you know. So yeah, exploring those and the natural phenomena that are occurring that bring about paranormal phenomena or connection with the other is fascinating in and of itself. Jason, we have about 4 minutes left in our conversation here. Let everybody know where they can go to not only keep up with your work, but you have some amazing stuff. I actively have your pendulum right here on my desk. I keep it with me all the time. I keep it inside of a bell jar actively on the side of my desk, and have seen it move a couple times during conversation. That's kind of the idea behind having it on the bell jar on the shelf off to the side is I ain't touching it. It ain't being hit by a breeze. That's really interesting.
Very cool.
Yeah, I love having it right here. Let everybody know where they can go to keep up with your work, where they can go to get their copies of Egyptian Postures of Power, as well as Astral Genesis. This book right here, folks, Astral Genesis, will honestly introduce you to so much. Like you could branch off into the world of masonry from this. You could branch off into the world of Mayan studies. This will take you about 8, 9 different paths down the road of esoteric studies, folks. Astral Genesis is amazing. Where can people go to keep up with your work? Where can they go to purchase your books, crystals, all that kind of good stuff, my friend?
My personal website is thecrystalsun.com, which is right on the feed here. And this is where you can get the books and crystals and different things from my site. And if you want, it's also available on Amazon. So if you just type my name, Jason Quitt, on Amazon, you will get my books as well. And I'm not that active on social media, but when I am active, it's usually on Twitter, and it's Jason_Quitt.
Awesome. Jason, thank you so much for the time, man. I greatly appreciate it. I would love to have you on again and again. We could talk for hours, man.
Thank you. When I get the new book out, I'll come back.
I can't wait. I cannot wait. I can't wait. I love your research. It's absolutely awesome. It invigorates me every time I read it. So thank you for all of your hard work. I'll be sharing links, all that kind of good stuff. Thank you so much for the great conversation tonight. Take care of yourself, and we'll be in touch very soon, my friend.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Man, Jason Quitt, everybody. What an amazing conversation. And once again, just we'll be getting more into, stay tuned, Jason, into the second part of the episode, because our guest coming up, Stephen Myers from the Pharaoh's Pump Foundation, has some groundbreaking work that will be showing articles on air, things like that, about a lake in the area, about there being a huge flooding event there in the Great Pyramid area. He talks about a retention wall. He talks about using the actual Nile and damming the Nile off and using water locks to float the bricks of the pyramids into place. Brilliant, brilliant work from Stephen Myers coming up in our next segment, everybody. Stay tuned through this quick break. We will be right back after this. Well, hello, everybody, and welcome back from commercial break. Thank you so much for staying tuned, and thank you so much to all of our sponsors, especially our good friend Christopher Lynch over at True Hemp Science. True Hemp Science is your source for some of the best CBD that I have found, folks. I have tried CBD all over the country. I was recommended CBD by my doctor probably about 6 years ago now for my travel anxiety, and I found Christopher Lynch a few months after. I have tried things at dispensaries across the country. His is the only CBD that I have found with actual terpene profiles. Amazing stuff, spigyrically made. 100% of the plant is used. Stop on by and check them out. TrueHempScience.com is the website. Curious7 is the code that you want to use to save 7% off your entire cart of $50 or more, and get two free edibles on your way out the door. Our guest in this segment is the author of Lost Technologies of the Great Pyramid. He is the founder of thepump.org. He is also author of the amazing new book, ebook format right now, Pharaoh's Pump Analyzed, examining the research of Edward J. Kunkel. Stephen has been on the show with us before. Welcome back to the show. Stephen Myers, how are you doing, my friend?
Very good. Thank you for having me back on the show. It's quite an honor. It
is always a pleasure talking with you. You know, this show, when Dudes and Beer started a long time ago, the first incarnation that you were on of this program, the whole idea was furthering the conversation of humanity and demystifying things, demystifying people's understanding of things. And you, I think, are one of the most level-headed researchers out there when it comes to the Great Pyramid, the uses of the Great Pyramid, and specifically Great Pyramid construction. I have a hypothesis of the use of the Great Pyramid, but specifically the construction and the use of water locks to construct the Great Pyramid, I think, is one of the most visionary and common sense things that I have ever heard, Stephen. So how did you first come into the realm of researching this and researching the construction of the Great Pyramid to begin with?
Well, I have a very technical background, and I enjoy history. So I focused on a lot of different things, you know, like antique gasoline engines, that type of thing, very early cars. I like that. But I also enjoyed ancient history, and the Great Pyramid is a technological wonder built in distant history. So I got interested in that and read a bunch of books, certainly by Egyptologists, you know, back when I got started quite a few years ago. And those were very unsatisfactory because they didn't engage in the scientific method. The Egyptology didn't perform any demonstrations to justify their stories. They've never made a casing stone like those at the Great Pyramid. Yeah. Egyptology has never moved a 70-ton payload 1 inch or lifted it up 200 feet high and set it in place. So I was very dissatisfied with Egyptologists, and ultimately read all the alternative books about an alien beacon and Bible prophecy. You know, the Great Pyramid confirms Bible prophecy, all of those correlations. But then I finally found a book by Edward Kunkel, privately published with a small distribution, and read it, and it was astounding. He talked about the Great Pyramid was built in the real world, and that it could be studied using valid research methods, and you could actually determine how heavy stones were moved from one place to another. And his contention was the use of water locks and barges was the method of choice in distant antiquity to move all of those stones with ease. And that's why my third book is essentially about his book, Pharaoh's Pump, and I've just analyzed that book, and it's out on in ebook format. And so It just came out. So that's kind of the big news that I've done recently. So that's where we're at right now.
Well, and as soon as you let me know it was available, I went out and got it and was like, we need to get you on for our upcoming pre-record sessions, man, and get into this conversation, because here lately there have been numerous headlines, and typically whenever I post things about pyramids, the Nile, moving stones, things like that, normally whenever I post them in the group, like I tag you to let you know. And the one that I posted the other day, which was actually December 11th, like not even a month ago, was out of Indy 100. Discovery from space shows the pyramids were built using water. Like, this is literally hot off the presses. For years, you know, there have been the Egyptological hypotheses of, you know, we need half-mile long ramps to push things up. We're gonna take it off the perfectly good water that we already know how to dam up and control and everything else, and just drag them across the dirt on rolling pylons. You know, things that Occam's razor wise really don't make sense. You know,
yeah, I do know. Yeah, there's all of the ramp stuff and all of that, but how fascinating it is that none of that is being validated through the scientific method with demonstrations. But water locks all over the globe are being used 24 hours a day and actually work. So the Erie Canal, when built in the 1830s, was able to move and lift 70-ton payloads.
Yeah.
And but now Egyptology can't move a 70-ton payload, but they can tell you how it was done all day long.
Well, and you know, it's interesting because the movement of water, the use of water was huge in numerous ancient cultures. When you start looking at places like Teotihuacan, stuff like that, where it was almost a man-made Venusian, or not Venusian, but Venice situation.
Yes.
Even looking at the canals of Venice, things like that, and the mastery of that. Now, granted, that was medieval times, stuff like that, but once again, the Egyptians knew the cycles of the Nile. They lived and died by the Nile. The Nile was in a totally different cycle and distance from town than it is now. At that point, those were very fertile regions, right there where the pyramids were, everything else. So, to think that, the desert encroached the way the desert encroaches now, 10,000 years ago is, I think, ecologically a little silly to begin with.
Oh, that's true. The course of the Nile has changed over the millennia, and the Egyptian Valley of the Nile was much more it wasn't as arid. It was more a savanna type area, more productive, that type of thing. But there's a profound link, certainly, between ancient Egypt and water. And I extend that link to the profound link between water and the Great Pyramid. So we think it was assembled using water locks and barges, and that it served as infrastructure to be a huge machine that was used to pump water. And my books describe that whole water pumping process and construction process in detail.
Well, and it's pretty remarkable once you start getting into things. You have an entire series of videos out that really break a lot of this stuff down. I'm bringing it up on screen right now. We have right there on curiousrealm.com/videos, everybody, is where you can find all of our guests' YouTubes. And if you click there, like you have tons of videos about not only the use of water locks to construct the pyramid, but the use of the pyramid as an actual water pump to help fertilize the Nile Delta, to help bring fresh water up. to grow crops, things like that.
We do. We have a video series that describes in detail with computer-generated animations how the Great Pyramid was assembled using waterlocks and barges. And then our other video series is about how the Great Pyramid operated as a machine to pump water. So it's interesting. The largest structure in the Valley of the Nile is the High Aswan Dam, and much of the electricity from that dam is used to pump water in the Valley of the Nile. So Egypt has always needed water pumps, both in ancient times and in modern times. So that's that's what we're about. So it's the Great Pyramid wasn't just built by knuckle draggers to keep some sort of a pharaoh's body safe, even though it didn't work that way at all. It had long open passages and doors on pivots, but the Great Pyramid was a wise investment and a machine that provided a huge return on investment.
Well, yeah, and especially whenever you're looking at it as your book is called, the prosperity machine, the idea that this is yes, a collective effort of people across a couple of generations to build this massive structure was a massive payoff in how it helped them grow food, how it helped them fertilize the Nile Delta, and literally basically geoengineer their location to make their life better.
Yes, you understand it well. They also, besides irrigated year-round, they powered heavy machinery. They probably created massive amounts of compressed air for scientific and industrial purposes, and did a whole host of different things. With compressed air, you can make high voltage static electricity. And I see the Giza plateau not as a graveyard originally, but I see it more as a industrial park and science center for an advanced civilization.
And that's the thing, is that, now don't get me wrong, like when it comes to Orion correlation theory, things like that, like that's one of my favorite things with you, is that you constantly post Occam's razor type memes about such things like, correlation is not causation. Just because it looks like something in homage to it doesn't mean that that is the purpose of its building, or that it was, connected to that in such a deep way. And but at the same token, you are not saying that they were not using the pyramid to help power some kind of other technology, that they weren't using it to make compressed air, that they weren't using it to help turn water wheels, to possibly cut stone faster, all kinds of things.
Or generate electricity.
Or to generate electricity, 100%. Especially when you start looking at the construction materials of the Great Pyramid, pretty much just a big stack of superconductor and, resistive material called granite. I even hold the hypothesis that the air tubes, the air tunnels coming out of the king's chamber were used as almost like a binaural beat pattern to basically cause compression in the king's chamber and activate the piezoelectric qualities of the pyramid, and of the stone itself, by causing compression inside of a small chamber, basically making it into a big piezoelectric beating heart, using the passing of the air, literally going past it, super easy to do, not incredibly hard. And when you start looking at why are there baffles to control the airflow inside of the shafts, especially if the shafts are there to, are they there to like hold the spirit back for a certain amount of time before it ascends to the heavens? Like, why are there air baffles if those shafts are used to send the soul to the stars, as we are told? Why are there zero inscriptions for the soul to read as we are told every tomb needs. You know, you would spend all this time and money to build a tomb for a pharaoh and then just leave him in the nether void, you know.
Right. You know, it's interesting. Temples and in the Valley of the Kings, every single surface has got some kind of a hieroglyph or something written on it.
Yeah.
But the exception is the Great Pyramid. There's no writing at all, formal writing, inside the passages and chambers. And the reason is it's a machine. It doesn't need writing in it.
Yeah.
And it operated as a machine, just like there's no writing inside the engine of your car, maybe a few part numbers.
Yep.
But it doesn't tell you like about our president's list or what stars we like the best or anything. The engine in a car is a machine, and it doesn't function based on writing. And the Great Pyramid is a machine. It was built to return a huge return on investment that justified the extremely large cost to build the Great Pyramid.
Yeah, precisely. And it's interesting once you start breaking apart what traditional Egyptology says about the Great Pyramid, because once again, I am a huge fan of Egyptology, of the study of it, hieroglyphs, everything else. But there is definitely, when it comes to the Great Pyramid, when it comes to the pyramids themselves, period, there seems to be a divergence. There seems to be some different kind of thinking about it, Stephen, and it's strange. And once again, we're told by all Egyptology that, like, in order for these pharaohs, in order for anybody to extend to the afterlife, that you have to read these spells from the Book of the Dead so that your heart is weighed against that of a feather by Set. And then you continue incantations until you hop on the boat and carry yourself forward on the intercelestial Nile to go forward to the stars. But none of that's there. Zero. If you look at that wall right there behind the tomb he's laying in, it is smooth granite. Maybe there are some burn marks that are also kind of weird. But there's nothing. There's nothing.
Yeah. No writing whatsoever. Very, very strange. But Egyptology has essentially dropped the ball and has decided to refrain from using the scientific method. They offer a hypothesis, like they can say the precision stone cutting was done using copper chisels and pounders, but then they don't substantiate their story by making a casing stone, for example. So it's odd. And Egyptology, believe it or not, is a science that is currently in crisis because it's founded on a lot of very poor research methods, like declaring an edict and then expecting us to believe it. So Egyptology has stagnated as a science in terms of pyramid construction techniques, and I don't know hardly anybody that believes in what Egyptologists say that are past the 8th grade anymore. So Egyptology is losing its relevance in understanding ancient Egypt, and I think that Egyptology is the biggest hindrance to understanding the ancient cultures in the Valley of the Nile.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting because it is slowly becoming that way with so many fields of study, Stephen, where things are slowly coming about that are changing the paradigm so much. I mean, once again, the dialogue for generations now, since literally the time before the discovery of Tutankhamun, was the fact that pyramids were built by slaves, that pyramids were built, using huge ramps that they dragged and pushed stones up. And here we are right here in 2023, seeing this evidence of exactly what you and pharaohspump.org, the amazing book that you've researched to write your new book, everything else that Kunkel, your research, everything else pretty well stands.
I appreciate that. Yeah. We're in a revolution of ideas, and, it's the experts that are the last ones to change their minds. It was the experts that were the last ones that finally acknowledged the Piltdown skull was a forgery, so.
The Brontosaurus wasn't real, man.
Right.
I have a shirt, one of my favorite T-shirts in the world. My brother gave it to me for Christmas like a decade ago. It has holes all in it, but it just has a Brontosaurus and it says "Never forget."
Yeah.
Because like that. I don't know how many friends of mine that was their favorite dinosaur growing up. Utter lie. That is a conglomeration of like 2-3 different skeletons that were found near each other.
Right. They had the wrong skull on different skeletons,
not
that type of thing. So we're in a revolution of ideas, and very few people believe phrenology anymore. That's a science about the bumps on people's heads and all of that. That was taught in universities. So, but it has ceased to exist because it cannot withstand the rigors of the scientific method. And Egyptology is the phrenology of the 21st century. It cannot withstand the rigors of the scientific method. Their stories are not even compelling, but their stories are impossible to demonstrate in the real world. With the idea of Doriite pounders and the big ramp that's bigger than the pyramid itself, and all of that is farcical. And Egyptology is becoming just a mystery religion that doesn't involve science or the process of using valid research methods. So it's going to have to either change or it will go away. It'll end up in the ash heap of rejected ideas, and Egyptology will be a cautionary tale, just like phrenology is a cautionary tale on how not to conduct research.
Yeah. And with that being said, let's start getting into the evidence that points to a lock system being used. Let's start going through that beautiful Occam razor mentality that you have as to how this was actively done, Stephen.
Well, the original builders already had stones on barges. Many of the quarries were across the river, and the largest stones were brought from farthest away, about 400 miles upstream. So they've already had stones on barges, so they just built water locks from the catch basin in the Nile that was near the construction site. And that series of water locks brought stones up effortlessly that were already on barges up to the building site. And the first stones that were set in place were the casing stones for the first level. And they are cemented together watertight with a bonding agent that's stronger than the stone itself. So they had a square wall around at the construction site. The original builders were able to supply water at the construction site, and they filled that square wall up, and it became a square pond. Well, they had water locks from the Nile that communicated all the way up into that square pond, and that allowed stones on barges to move into that pond, and they would move stones from the barge off of the barge and set them into the pond. And when that pond was filled with stones, the first level of the Great Pyramid was completed. They built it level by level. So then the next stones they brought up on barges were the next layer of casing stones. And they set them in place, bonded them all together watertight, added additional water, which brought the pond up to the next level. And they added an additional water lock to the flight of water locks they already had. So They systematically brought stones up from the Nile River effortlessly and moved them up to the pond that was at the second level. And then they moved the stones off of the barges into the pond. And when they filled the pond up again, if you will, with stones, then the second level of the Great Pyramid was completed. So it was very systematic. They went up level by level, including casing stones. And there's a lot of evidence to indicate that the Great Pyramid was built level by level, and that the casing stones for each level was set in place first, and then the interior stones for that level. They built the passages and chambers level by level. You know, as they got to the king's chamber, they put in the walls at the same level that the rest of the Great Pyramid was under construction, and then the ceiling stones. So it was very systematic, very fast, and all of that. So it's interesting, the Erie Canal here in the United States that I mentioned, it could move the weight of the Great Pyramid higher than the height of the Great Pyramid in a period of 2 years. So, you know, that's why they went to the effort to build the infrastructure of the Erie Canal, is because it provided a huge return on investment.
Yeah.
You know, that's why, I don't know exactly where you live, but every town has a sewer system. Yeah. Why do they spend all that money on that?
Yeah.
Because it's a huge return on investment. You can have people, you know, congregated together, and you can reduce disease and everything else. It's infrastructure that provides prosperity for the people who built it and paid for it. That's 100. Why we have roads and the power grids. All of this is infrastructure that creates prosperity. Huge return on investment. The Great Pyramid was the same way. It provided a huge return on investment for the people that built it. And it was justified. It made sense. It helped people in a tangible way. And it was a prosperity machine built in ancient times.
Well, and let's get into that part real quick, because that I think is one of the, I mean, not that the construction of the pyramid is not hotly debated. And what evidence do we have? I mean, of course, this would have taken generations to build. I mean, much like the Erie Canal, which was a good 15-year project or so. And that's with modern excavation machines, things like that. So I can imagine that it would have taken at least, you know, even as they say, pushing rocks, they would have spent a couple 100 years building this thing. And I imagine it would have been probably that, even using water and boats. You know, it would have been at least 100 or so years. But with that being said, and that much water for that long, are there any water lines, any levels, any remaining parts of the retaining wall, things like that would be proof of this hypothesis of construction, Stephen?
There's a lot of evidence for water related to the Great Pyramid. There was a enclosure wall around the Great Pyramid that existed up until the 18th century. The savants of Napoleon in 1803 drew a lot of illustrations that included that retaining wall, and we think that was part of the construction process. Egyptologists say it was to keep the unwashed masses away from the big tomb. That was ineffectual, but we think it was part of the process. Sir Flanders Petrie found Nile earth inside the passages and chambers of the Great Pyramid, and we understand that now as being called sediment. So there was sediment. Herodotus, at least in several translations, described the Great Pyramid as being like an island surrounded by water. I mean, was that like a metaphor or flowery language? But the retaining wall, we think, retained water. So it was like a big island that had a retaining wall around it so it'd be like a lake, just bigger than the island, if you will. So the casing stones being cemented together watertight is another indicator that water was involved, and also the salts of the inside the Queen's chamber. Primarily, there was a deposit of salts is the term that they used.
Yeah.
But it was a deposit. We think that was part of the from the sediment in the water, the muddy water of the Nile, but also part of the electrolysis process. We think electrolysis occurred inside the Great Pyramid, as do other researchers who think the Great Pyramid was a machine.
Yep.
And that caused salts to be deposited on the walls of both the Queen's Chamber and the lower end of the Grand Gallery. So all of that is water-related evidence, and certainly there's other indicators that water was a function or fundamentally important to the Great Pyramid. So my books describe all of that in detail about certainly water in the Great Pyramid.
Absolutely. And, with that being said, we've got you for about another 30 minutes or so. Let's start getting into the actual function of the pump and how it was used to bring more water to the area.
We think the original builders supplied water to the Great Pyramid site. How that was done is under scholarly debate. I think it was brought in from the ancient Lake Maurice, which still exists. It has an Arab name now, but it's much lower in elevation. And but we think that water was brought from that lake to the building site, where the Great Pyramid was. Water entered the Great Pyramid water pump at the upper end of the descending passage, which is about 50 feet above the base of the Great Pyramid. And then it went down the descending passage all the way to the subterranean chamber, and that chamber is considered by many to be unfinished, but I think it was finished because it caused water, which enters one end of the chamber, to move in a whirlpool, and the other end has these mounds that are from the rock. So people say, oh, well, it wasn't finished, but it was. And what those mounds do is act like a water break and cause a whirlpool deep below the Great Pyramid. So we think that the builders used the property of implosion in the subterranean chamber that Victor Schauberger, an Austrian naturalist and researcher, says, it talked about implosion. So that implosion force was used to move water up through the grotto and up into the lower end of the descending passage, and in the the lower end of the Grand Gallery. So once it was in the lower end of the Grand Gallery, we think electrolysis occurred in that chamber, which separated hydrogen and oxygen from the water.
Yep.
So that was a volatile fuel that was ignited at the proper time. And that combustion, or fire in the middle, which you often hear, that combustion was used to create a vacuum above the water in the Grand Gallery.
Okay.
So that vacuum assisted moving water up higher. A huge, massive, maybe 100-ton water piston would move up in the Grand Gallery. Then they had a series of valves and linkages that at the proper time they would open a valve in the upper end of the Grand Gallery, which would break the vacuum and cause that water to push down and go into the Queen's chamber. And with valves and everything, water would go in through a check valve and then stop. That's quite an illustration there, but it would stop and it would compress the air in the upper end of the Queen's chamber to a very high degree. And then with the shut valve, that air acting similar in a way, to a hydraulic ram pump. The compressed air would push water up to the king's chamber and then ultimately out through the king's chamber vents. So we think that the input was the upper end of the descending passage, but the output was pretty high out of both king's chamber vents.
Interesting. And once again, it does not take a whole lot of voltage for electrolysis to take place. We know for a fact that, the Egyptians and others used things like the Baghdad battery to
it's interesting. That technology is from the same area, if you will. So Egyptologists say, well, that's just like a religious artifact for some, but it actually is a battery.
It's a functional battery, and we know that the Egyptians electroplated things. Which means that they had a functional use of low voltage, like in the range of 3 volts, like less than what it takes to charge your cell phone, slightly more than a AA battery.
Right.
Is all it takes to do light electroplating, things like that, especially if you are using the proper chemicals.
And the ancient Egyptians, or the builders of the Great Pyramid, there was nothing dumb about them. Nothing.
They had a great knowledge of the use of their local chemistry, local minerals, things like that, in chemical properties of them. They had an incredible knowledge of such things, even to the point that they could make a battery. And even have the concept of how to make a dry cell battery with electrolyte and plates to carry charge and that's a certain level of sophistication.
Actually, the research for that battery, I just want to point that out, is not from Egyptology.
No.
So it was from outside of the realm of Egyptology. So Egyptology didn't even help in that regard. Yeah,
that was found much more in the right of I want to say it was found almost in the same way as the Dead Sea Scrolls, where it was like found in a cave.
Right, but they found a bunch of those jars with some corroded, like an iron rod and then a copper tube. But it was technologists that said, well, this might be something. Let's make one and see what happens. And they poured grape juice in it and got 1.5 volts out of it.
Yeah.
So, that's called the scientific method, and Egyptology doesn't do that. They don't do demonstrations on anything associated with
They've
technology.
tried. And I think that's why they maybe don't do it anymore, because I've definitely seen a couple of like Nova exposés, things like that have come around in my lifetime, where they have like, okay, this team of workers and scientists are going to, in a scale amount of time, build a scale replica of the Great Pyramid, using the known technology at the time. And they're once again, as you said, never able to replicate it. Like, which is the point of science. That is the point of experimentation, is the replication of the results of the hypothesis.
Yeah, they're very deceptive. They'll move a 1.5 ton stone a few feet, and then they'll say that's how they move the 70-ton payloads. And it's just very deceptive. It's like I can say, oh, I can lift a car. I can just grab a full-size car and then just lift it over my head, just like that. And then someone will say, prove it. Oh yeah, I can prove it. I'll demonstrate it by getting a Hot Wheels car and then lifting it over my head.
Yeah. I can stop a moving train.
There's a scalability issue. But Egyptology, how they get away with it, I have no idea. But they won't forever. And they will die on the vine and become irrelevant. And, we'll go on and to learn the truth.
Now, and with that being said, of course, I mean, they're listeners of my show. I myself hold, once again, some interesting hypothesis when it comes to pyramids, their uses, things like that. Even the hypothesis of using it as a water pump, when you start looking at the design of the Great Pyramid of Giza, especially as a cutaway view, there is definitely a structure to it that is very much akin to a hydraulic cylinder, almost like what's in your car, like a compression cylinder. It's pretty interesting.
Yeah, Sir Flanders Petrie, in one of his books, said it was like walking inside of a machine. And the precision is phenomenal, and the complexity is amazing, much more complex than it needed to be to bury somebody's treasure, if you will. So it certainly, I think, had a function that wasn't symbolic. The function wasn't religious or anything like that. It wasn't to tell us anything. But the Great Pyramid was complex based on function. So that's our direction of research that we're following to understand what was common knowledge in when the Great Pyramid was built. It's like all a mystery now, but it was just common knowledge, and everybody understood it because they watched the Great Pyramid being built and they watched it being used for its original purpose. But it is the honor and duty of modern day researchers to understand, rediscover what was common knowledge back when the Great Pyramid was built.
Yeah. And I mean, of course, that's where a lot of the issue comes in. I mean, we have cuneiform tablets. We have, writings from ancient Greece. We have all kinds of documents about Egypt, all kinds of documents about Egyptian religious belief. And no doubt that because of things like the Rosetta Stone, we have a good grasp on what those hieroglyphs say. However, we have no hieroglyphic writings about how or why the pyramids were built. Like there's none of that. So it is really and truly an entire mystery when it comes to Egyptology and why they were built. There are hypotheses once again of, they were built as machines to send the souls to the stars. Okay. I don't get me wrong. Sure. Absolutely. Or that may be a metaphor for something else. What have you, even the idea of pumping something from the underground and bringing it back to life in the real world, that in and of itself is a metaphor for the same thing, and a metaphor for the actual functionality of, an underground chamber that is drawing water from under the ground and bringing it back up to bring life to the valley. So like that in and of itself makes sense, but to say that they were built by aliens, I don't know. Once again, I am a big believer in the ingenuity of humanity. Archimedes loved playing with water. The control of water and water displacement was one of his obsessions in his work. And he drew most of his knowledge and most of his information from Egypt. And most of that knowledge was sadly lost in the great fires of the Library of Alexandria,
Right.
So yeah.
I don't bring in the idea of aliens with what I'm doing. I think all civilizations have geniuses that can do things that the regular people can't fully understand, like alternating current. Believe it or not, it's rather complicated.
Yes.
And but Nikola Tesla figured it out in one day, and it had a huge, return on investment, huge advantages. So probably in ancient times there was somebody that could make some very strong bonding agents. Someone else that was excellent at logistics.
Yeah.
They had a wise leader that funded this project, and they built it, but not aliens. If you if you bring in the idea of aliens, you are saying ancient people weren't smart enough to stack rocks on top of each other. And, you mentioned that. It's the flip side of that coin with the with aliens. No. They could do it, but they just didn't. But aliens had to do it. So you can't have it both ways. Yeah. So it's also, I don't know if I could bring this up,
Feel
but
free.
It's also kind of racist to say that the people in the Valley of the Nile couldn't have done it and you needed aliens. Because think about
it's
the
aliens,
they say there's about 57 races, and on Earth there's about 6, and you add all them up together, what's the one race that couldn't build the Great Pyramid?
Yeah. That none of them could. That none of them could. The Mayans couldn't construct it without help.
But there's one race, But I'd take a different tone. I'd say, well, the people in the Valley of the Nile were geniuses, and they were able to manipulate the environment they lived in for their own advantages. Oh, that's much more satisfying to me than saying it was aliens.
Well, and that's just it, though. We do not have we don't have the connection to the world around us that our great grandparents had, Stephen. Now, granted, you've got about 3 or 4 years on me. But like my grandfather grew up as a sharecropper. He grew up he didn't need a farmer's almanac to know when to put beets in the ground. He knew when to put beets in the ground because his great-grandfather told him, hey, just so you know, this is about the time of year you need to put your beets in the ground if you want them to grow right. Those were things that we were just connected to in a different way that we no longer have the need for, and that's how quick technology leaves. That's how quick imagine if the trucks stopped moving. Imagine if the railways stopped moving tomorrow, America. Where would you get your produce?
Yeah.
Where would you get it? True. How would you get your vitamins?
Yeah.
How would you get all of this?
People would be overwhelmed, and you wouldn't go down to the store if they ran out of electricity.
It'd be gone. Look at the first week of COVID.
Yeah.
First week of COVID, even before lockdowns, it was bare. It was gone.
I remember that. Yeah.
And if you didn't have a garden in your backyard, if you didn't know how to till the soil in a city, because the soil in a city is different than the soil in a neighborhood's different than the soil out in the country. It's right on. And you got to know how to do that. And those were things that nobody had to. My grandfather didn't have to go ask somebody at Lowe's how to take care of his soil and make it rich and bountiful. He was taught that. We don't have that.
We take for granted all the high technology that we have. And I think that we have technology, probably with integrated circuits and all of that, that the ancient Egyptians or whoever built the Great Pyramid, they didn't have that. But I think they had technology or wisdom or understanding of physics that we don't have
110%.
And they use that to develop this water pumping technology, and probably so much more that we don't even know about.
And a freestanding building that is freestanding still. I challenge you to go out and find a freestanding building made by modern day spec that is older than 100 years old that has not been maintained.
Yeah.
We have wire infrastructure inside of those, steel infrastructure, everything else. Even right now, I've got up on screen the article from Science Alert about how we finally know how ancient Roman concrete was so durable. You look at things like the Pantheon, that was, or the Parthenon rather, that was quite literally built with molds. There's no rebar holding that up.
Right. Yeah.
That was built with a
That's
huge...
an amazing example of some ancient high technology.
Not just that, aqueducts.
Yes.
Unaided You were mentioning sewers earlier. Just to bring it back to that, a sewer line unaided will be destroyed within 20 years. And that is reinforced with rebar, all kinds of things. The Roman aqueducts are still pumping water, man.
Yeah.
No rebar.
Great infrastructure.
No rebar.
For darn sure.
And we just now figured that out. There was a great show on Discovery Channel years ago, back when Discovery and History used to, show shows like that. There was one called Without Man, I believe it was. It went on for like a year, like a season or two. But it basically showed like, okay, here's a modern city. Now let's progress it without humans for the next 100 years. And like within 20 years, the place is like a jungle again, like plants are growing out of the side of the building and, buildings are dilapidated and falling down. And like without our intervention, our construction methods now won't even last a generation. You would come in 2 generations from now and it would look like a barren wasteland.
Yeah, it's a whole different world. Yeah, the Great Pyramid was built, and then the next solid structure that was built taller than the Great Pyramid was the Eiffel Tower.
Yeah.
So the Great Pyramid was the tallest building for at least 45 centuries. It's, they're an impressive group of people that built the Great Pyramid. Yeah, that's another interesting article.
Yeah.
About the relationship between water and the construction of the Great Pyramid.
100%.
Funny, Egyptology has put up a wall of silence and don't even acknowledge that I exist or that I've written a book or
numerous
anything
books,
like that. They won't even say that I'm wrong. It's just absolute, circle the wagons silence.
Yeah.
As their weapon against me. So it's been a fun and interesting experience in a lot of ways, studying the Great Pyramid and how and why it was built.
Well, I always love our conversations, man. They are lively. They are full. You are a wealth of knowledge on this stuff, man. Like when it comes to, once again, the common sense view of construction of the Great Pyramid. Like I have, since finding your work years ago and reading your work and watching your work and having these conversations with you, I have come closer and closer and closer to this. Just makes utter sense. Like why would you stop the Nile that you had already mastered and using? Why would you just, okay, that's enough. Let's drag it across the dirt now, guys, for the next mile and a half.
Right.
Like, it makes zero sense when you already know how to flood the Nile Delta, when you already know how to use locks, when you already know how to dam things up. That's a loss of logic to me. It's like the logic machine just ceased right where the Nile Delta did.
Well, I appreciate those kind words.
Well, 100%. Before we let you go, let everybody know where they can go to get their new copy of the book, Pharaoh's Pump Analyzed, where they can go to follow all of the work of the Pharaoh's Pump Foundation, and where they can go to contribute and help you out, where they, if you have any links for contributions, things like that, where they can contribute to the research and help get word out there and help finance things.
Well, the best thing they can do to find out about me is to go to my website at thepump.org. So they can check that out and and find out what I'm doing, what my schedule is. You can find out what our nonprofit organization is up to. It'll answer a lot of your questions and about the research. So you can email me through that website and also click on our Facebook page. That's about the only social media that I do. Everything, it's so time consuming, you can't do it all. So, but I do have my third book out called Pharaoh's Pump Analyzed. It's in ebook format, a Kindle ebook on Amazon, as well as my other 2 books are both in softcover and ebook format. So those pictures there is all 3 of my books. One is about how the Great Pyramid was built, and the other is about why, and then it was built, and then the third is analyzing where the genesis of this direction of research came from, Edward Kunkel's book, and to analyze his book and what he said and describe how this direction of research has progressed since he wrote his book, and all of that. So I hope people, that's what the revolution is going to look like. People reading books, not just
thumbing
believing
pages.
what somebody tells them.
What's that about? Well, and that is exactly what we discuss on this show all the time. Is we are given beautiful, amazing organs called brains to flex and use and reuse and to rehash the same information. If you're not learning something about what you're passionate about daily, or relearning something, or even challenging your learning of it, you're probably not growing as a human being. It's just that simple. So yes, challenge your learning, challenge your beliefs, be willing to have those hard conversations, folks. Be willing to have people disagree with your beliefs and open-heartedly and open-mindedly listen to their disagreement. Take it into your datum set. It's important. This is how conversations and discoveries happen. So, thank you as always for your time, Stephen. I greatly appreciate it. I am a huge fan of everything that you do over at pharaohspump.org. So thank you for your time as always.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it, Chris.
Absolutely. While you are online checking out all of the amazing work of Stephen Myers, everybody, make sure to stop on by and follow him on YouTube. You can find his content there. Just look up at Great Pyramid Pump on YouTube, and you can follow his channel as we do. Make sure to stop on by Curious Realm. CuriousRealm.com/videos is where you can easily find the work of Stephen Myers. You can watch all of his videos there, like, follow, subscribe. You can also find all of our episodes as well as our store at CuriousRealm.com. Make sure to like, follow, subscribe, share, comment, all that kind of good stuff, folks. Thank you as always for your open minds, your open hearts. That is what makes conversation. And without conversation, we do not move forward as humanity, everybody. That is our charge as humanity, is to have the conversation, to have open hearts, have open minds. So take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and remember, stay curious. We'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye. Thank you for tuning into this episode of The Curious Realm. Stay tuned for more guests, forbidden topics, and hidden truths. Download the official Curious Realm app and view the Knowledge Vault on our website, CuriousRealm.com. Follow us on social media by searching Curious Realm. Curious Realm is available on your favorite podcast services, as well as YouTube, Roku, Amazon Fire, and Apple TV through the APR TV app. Available on all app markets. Thanks for listening. Stay curious. And remember, the other side is always watching.